Mr. Speaker, it's been talked about today about the technological changes and the advancement in medicine that allows for the babies to be viable at a much earlier age now. Instead of waiting until 6 months, at times you're able to see a viable child within the 5 to 6 month time frame. Mr. Speaker, when my wife was pregnant for my daughter back in the mid 80s, and we went in and got the ultrasound, I remember the ultrasound technician pointing out to us where my daughter was at in the ultrasound. Because at the time, the technology just wasn't that great. I mean, it was really, really miraculous, it seemed at that time, that you could look inside the womb and see a baby and see where the baby's at in the womb and tell the position. But you weren't able to see a lot of detail at that time, Mr. Speaker. We fast forward another 30 years later, and my daughter is due to have our first grandchild, a baby girl, coming up next month, and she's been able to not only see an ultrasound in such detail that they're able to count the fingers and toes of the baby and measure the baby's nose and look at and do all these measurements that they do while the baby's still in the womb at such an early age now. But she's able to share those pictures through email or a text message. And today she, in fact, sent me, she had a checkup today, and she sent me her baby's heartbeat. So the baby's got a strong heartbeat and could come at any time now. So we're excited about seeing our granddaughter, but as one of the former members had talked about loving a child in the womb already, I've watched my daughter caring for her child already before the child has been born, and the decisions that she's making that can affect that child already, and taking care of herself and taking care of the baby at the same time, because she's getting feedback from that child with how the baby's reacting throughout the day, with what activities my daughter's been involved in at work or at home, and how the baby's reacting to the travel that my daughter's had to do or other things like that, and how active the baby is or whether the baby's sleeping. I mean, Mr. Speaker, it's just so hard to believe when I was able to look at those ultrasounds now of my grandchild and see her sucking her thumb in the womb through that ultrasound picture and see her little nose. And when you see that, you wonder how in the world could anybody with a conscience look at that and say that's not a life, Mr. Speaker, that's not a baby, Mr. Speaker, because of their own personal agenda. Mr. Speaker, it's time to bring an end to this barbaric procedure of dismemberment, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, even one of their own advocates here at the microphone earlier wouldn't say what the procedure was, just talked about there's a procedure. That's because the majority of the public, when they hear about a baby's limbs being ripped from it, Mr. Speaker, it horrifies them. It's not a choice. It's a murder. It's barbaric, and it needs to come to an end. And the ultrasound technology and the medical advancements that allow for a child to be viable now at a much earlier stage than it did in the 80s, Mr. Speaker, is the reason that we should pass this legislation so that children are protected after 20 weeks of age in the womb, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we're one of few nations that still allows this. I mean, you can understand why a communist nation like North Korea or China might allow some barbaric procedure, but why in the United States of America, where we read, as one of the former members stated, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and that among these are life. Vote for this, I ask, Mr. Speaker.